When Dean was young, his mother shared tales of a remarkable adventurer named Zagreus, found in a book about the sword saint called the Book of Zagreus. Dean always admired the thrilling adventures described in its pages. Zagreus stood out to him as both relatable and extraordinary, a legendary figure who climbed from poverty to become the famed sword saint. Tragically, Dean's parents passed away, and he soon learned that the adventures of his era paled in comparison to those in his cherished stories, especially Zagreus. His mother fell victim to demonic beasts that spilled from a demonic labyrinth, with no adventurer stepping in to save her. Similarly, his father, an adventurer himself, met a grim fate, betrayed and killed by his own comrades over a magic tool worth only a modest sum of tens of thousands of dummies. The adventurers Dean once idolized lacked the honor and principles of Zagreus, a realization that set him on a determined path. Inspired by this contrast, Dean vowed to emulate the sword saint and become a true hero. However, life dealt him a harsh blow, as he was born without the natural gift of magic needed to fulfill his ambitions. Far from becoming the powerful adventurer he envisioned, Dean ended up as a carrier, the lowest rung in the adventuring world. Carriers faced constant scorn and mistreatment from the adventurers they served, largely because they were seen as the weakest. The squad Dean worked with was no exception, harassing him, overworking him, and even threatening to cut his already pitiful wages if he didn't quickly haul their gear. Unlike most carriers who held secondary non-combat roles, Dean had no such option. He lacked the ability to take on another job, even if he wanted to. His sword, the humble Popo, could barely channel enough magic to be useful. The only magic he could muster was a simple spell to illuminate his surroundings. This spell, called Torch, was all Dean could manage, but even that was impractical since he couldn't afford to sustain it, forcing him to rely on a costly mana lamp instead. At a mere level 8, he couldn't access any other magic skills. As a carrier of the lowest rank with negligible stats, Dean Desmond Deed faced a bleak reality as an adventurer. While exploring a cave with his group, who mocked him for slowing them down, they stumbled upon a moose corpse. The gruesome scene required someone to sift through the corpse for valuables and determine how it died to better understand the cave's dangers. Naturally, the task fell to Dean, the weakest of the group. They ordered him to check if the moose's fight bone was still intact. After examining the remains, Dean told one of the adventurers, Gilbert, that he believed the fight bone had been taken. A fight bone, a vital part of an animal's skeleton, allowed creatures to transform life force into combat strength, making it a valuable component for magical tools due to its unique property. Because of this, it commanded a high price. The fight bone's value was immense, often worth thousands of times more than expected, yet Gilbert dismissed Dean's observation. He scolded Dean for speaking out and reminded him of the bone's worth, while the group continued to berate him. Dean couldn't help but note that the bone's value equaled roughly half a month's earnings for him. Still, Dean knew that even if he found the fight bone, it would only enrich his companions, not him. With no other choice, he grudgingly searched the corpse again, confirming his earlier suspicion. The moose's tailbone was shattered, and the fight bone was gone. As the group readied to move on, they threatened to dock 1,000 dummies from Dean's pay. Dean is troubled as he ponders what could have killed the moose, a creature known as the strongest on the 3rd level, making it unusual to see it as prey, especially with its head severed. Gilbert, as typical, ignores Dean's concerns, casually suggesting that lions gathered around the corpse were likely responsible. Dean notes the odd absence of flies, which usually swarm the labyrinth, but Gilbert dismisses this as a coincidence, proposing it might be a case of cannibalism. Continuing his reasoning, Dean argues that since moose don't eat each other, something else must have eliminated the flies, but Gilbert interrupts, warning that turning back over such a far-fetched idea could bankrupt the group due to travel costs, telling Dean to stay quiet unless he can cover the expenses, so they press on despite his objections. Unexpectedly, they encounter a moose eating, and while Dean senses danger, the adventurers, thrilled, charge in, confident they'll secure an easy kill. They urge Dean to use his light, believing luck is with them, but their excitement turns to horror as they face a monstrous group of moose devouring one of their own, a terrifying sight. Fleeing from this moose horde, Gilbert cruelly suggests using Dean as a decoy to ensure their escape, pushing him down as the others flee, leaving him to face the danger alone. Realizing it's suicidal to fight head-on, Dean knows he must find another way to survive. Confronted by a pack of gray moose, low-level demonic beasts, Dean draws courage from the Sword Saint's resolve, igniting his sword with torch magic to scare the moose, creating a chance to fight or flee. But another moose attacks from behind, landing a critical blow. As pain and fear overwhelm him, Dean tries to stay calm to find a way out, but nearing death, his mind blanks, and he wonders if this is his end, like his father's. Overwhelmed by the pain and the realization that he's achieved none of his life's goals, Dean faces the moose's final strike, but the labyrinth floor collapses, dropping him into a cave where he spots light from a hole, prompting him to investigate if he's safe or must keep running. Taking a few steps, Dean encounters a glowing demonic core, later learning it harbors the strongest demon, far surpassing the F-rank demon core he'd seen before, which powered magic. The core in his hands is clearly on a much higher, more dangerous tier, and though he tries to read its inscription to identify the demon, it's not easily discernible, suggesting at least a C-rank demon. An immense aura engulfs him, overwhelming and intangible, repelling him as he struggles to comprehend it. Then, a voice from the core warns him to handle it carefully, scolding him for gripping it too tightly, as it causes discomfort. Dean, shocked and terrified when the core spoke, hurled it away. The voice persisted, warning it must be handled carefully and asking if Dean recognized it. The core revealed itself as Beelzebub Durag Dago, a name that echoed with power. Beelzebub, renowned in the demon world, was Oracle, the king of the 7 deadly sins, and the pillar of gluttony. Frozen in fear and disbelief, Dean struggled to process what he heard. He couldn't fathom Beelzebub's presence here. Long ago, after a clash between the divine god Mazara and demonic Mana, the world fractured into 2 realms, the demon world, Oracle, and the human world, Illness. A barrier was erected between them, preventing demons in their true forms from crossing into the human world. The barrier's strength scaled with a demon's rank, making it nearly impossible for powerful demons to cross. Over the past 1,000 years, only a handful of high-ranking demons had managed to pass through in their full forms, so few they could be counted on one hand. There was no logical reason for Beelzebub, an S-tier demon and the strongest of all, to be here. The king of the 7 deadly sins was inexplicably in a cave in Illness. Dean felt a surge of fear for his life, mixed with confusion about how the mightiest demon stood before him, encased in a core. Instinct urged Dean to flee as the safest option. Sensing Dean's fear, Beelzebub relished his acknowledgement of its grandeur and demanded he kneel and beg forgiveness for mishandling it. Unwilling to comply, Dean bolted, terrified of losing his life. Realizing Dean might be its only human contact for ages, after a century of nothing but rats brushing against the core, Beelzebub pleaded for him to return. It reassured him, explaining it was merely a harmless demon core now, urging Dean to stay, as another human might not come for a long time. As Dean calmed, he questioned why the king of the 7 deadly sins was in a human world cave. Beelzebub revealed it had lost a power struggle in Oracle, one it cared little for. The other 6 pillars, fearing Beelzebub's ability to destroy them, conspired and set a trap to eliminate it. Their fear wasn't baseless. Beelzebub knew it could single-handedly annihilate all demons if it chose. Even now, it felt the urge to destroy them. The pillars carefully orchestrated Beelzebub's downfall, attacking when it couldn't retaliate. Its body was reduced to just the core, though its ego endured, a feat impossible for other demons, but not for Beelzebub. Assuming the world barrier wouldn't affect a mere core, it attempted a forceful transfer between worlds. The plan worked, but not as intended, leaving it dependent on a human in the human world. Beelzebub then begged Dean to free it from the dreary cave, promising lifelong subservience. Before it could finish, Dean interrupted, noting he couldn't escape himself. He'd fled from Moose, unable to defeat even one, which led him here. Insulted, Beelzebub called Dean weak, boasting that in its prime, it could vanquish foes with a flick of its finger. Dean retorted sharply, pointing out Beelzebub's current helplessness against rats rubbing on its core. He asked if Beelzebub could lend him power. This raised the issue of forming a pact, something Dean knew nothing about, let alone how to achieve. The Puccia Marudi ritual is a spiritual transformation process that uses a demon core as a go-between to temporarily turn it into a spirit, exclusive to ETR magic. However, higher-tier beings cannot unleash their full strength during this ritual. For Dean, mastering this ritual felt out of reach since he was limited to torch magic and struggled with the complex tulpa summoning technique. Frustrated, Beelzebub questioned whether Dean had any worthwhile traits, given his inability to handle even basic magic. Beelzebub stepped in to guide him, and since the ritual only required a core, no magical tools were necessary. Dean hesitated, unsure if he could trust the demon before him, knowing this was the king of the 7 deadly sins, and doubting his ability to control it post-spiritification. With few options, Dean decided to proceed. Beelzebub was thrilled, seeing it as a step toward regaining its former glory. They began training, starting with basic summoning, but after half a day there were no encouraging results. Dean paused to hunt for food, accepting that progress would take time. Dean returned to where he'd seen Moose, retrieving bags he'd left behind. In Gilbert's bag he found equipment which he dismantled to sell for money, breaking it into small pieces to avoid detection by other adventurers. Though ashamed of stealing magical devices, Dean felt compelled to do whatever it took to survive. He also recalled owing his best friend 10,000 times the amount she'd lent him. Despite her own struggles, she'd supported his dreams. As he contemplated earning 10,000 pennies, a herd of moose startled him. Lost in thought, he found an oni goat stomach painted with dye and repurposed it as a water container. As expected, food was scarce. Beelzebub mistook the painted goat stomach for a human delicacy, but Dean clarified he needed the water it held, along with mushrooms he'd gathered. He started making soup in the Goblin Realm, but since Goblin Room was toxic, he discarded it after preparing the stock. After finishing the melon-bot ammo in Goblin Room soup, it was time to taste it, and the soup was delicious. It delighted Dean's taste buds and even impressed Beelzebub. The rich, smooth Goblin Room soup warmed his mouth, offering comfort in their harsh circumstances. Beelzebub enjoyed it thoroughly. He praised Dean, urging him to make the soup again once he mastered Puccia Marudi, noting that in Oracle, food was bland and unremarkable. Touched by Beelzebub's reaction, Dean promised to cook for him as often as he liked. Refreshed and energized, Dean resumed training and successfully summoned a chick on the first day. This small victory felt significant, as few could use Tulpa, and having Beelzebub as a mentor was a stroke of luck. On the second day, he summoned a new moon, progressing quickly, and celebrated by roasting the oni goat stomach to eat. On the third day, Dean's summoning attempts failed, and with no food left, he grew desperate to activate the magic. 3 elements were needed: a clear mental image of the magic formula, visualizing the phenomenon and converting his Oto into the right type of magic. Dean was fully aware of what was holding him back. He struggles to recall the image of himself defeating a moose, needing that memory to mentally recreate the event. Unbeknownst to him, he would soon confront the moose as they were rapidly approaching, and he failed to notice. He considers escaping to a hole, but the moose block his path, leaving him trapped. With no escape route, he prepares to fight. This silences the mocking voices and insults in his mind, and by placing his faith in Beelzebub, he attempts to summon the spirit. To their astonishment, he successfully manifests the spirit, earning praise from Beelzebub, who can finally unleash chaos after a long hiatus. Dean is shocked to see the spirit appear as a little girl, and when he mentions this, Beelzebub angrily reminds him that she remains a formidable demon. As they bicker playfully with some horn poking, the moose closes in, catching their attention. The moose lashes out with its claws, but Beelzebub halts it with one hand, though her palm is injured in the process. Beelzebub shrugs off the injury, noting she's adjusting to the fragility of her current form. Without hesitation, she charges at the moose, relentlessly attacking with the intent to kill it quickly. Meanwhile, Dean feels unwell, sensing he lacks enough magic to sustain Beelzebub's manifestation for long. He reminds Beelzebub that their goal isn't to repel the moose but to break through and escape. He asks her to stall the moose, allowing him to head for the exit. They execute the plan, with Beelzebub getting serious, dispatching the moose effortlessly. When 2 monsters attack her simultaneously, she dodges with ease. Against Dean's expectations, Beelzebub swiftly eliminates both monsters. As she fights, she appears to revel in the chaos, taunting the monsters as lesser beings and urging them to challenge her. Dean, awestruck by her strength, heads toward the exit, feeling faint and unable to maintain the manifestation much longer. A moose attempts to strike Dean, but Beelzebub intervenes, severing its arm and snapping Dean back to reality. She urges him to reach the exit. Turning to the moose, she targets their weak point, a flight barn that transforms Oto into fighting spirit, attacking with blood-soaked hands and fierce savagery. Beelzebub tears through the moose effortlessly, challenging them to face her next. The moose, now terrified, flee from the greater monster before them, the king of the 7 deadly sins. With the threat gone, Beelzebub's manifestation begins to fade, and she contemplates her next move. Her first thought is her desire and Dean's promise. Beelzebub looks forward to enjoying Alma's cooking. Dean races through the dark tunnel, fixated on the bright light at the exit. Hope fuels him as he nears freedom, and with a final burst of energy, he sprints out of the labyrinth. Outside, exhausted, Dean collapses against a tree, shedding his filthy clothes to cool off. After catching his breath, he speaks with Beelzebub, now back in her orb form, amazed that she defeated all the moose alone. Beelzebub proudly confirms, noting that after she took down a few, the rest fled in fear. Dean calls her incredible, admitting he'd need years of training to face even one moose. Beelzebub encourages him, suggesting his progress isn't as distant as he believes. Confused, Dean asks for clarification, and she prompts him to check his status. He insists he's still the weakest adventurer, but is stunned to see his level has risen from 8 to 13. As he grapples with the sudden jump, Beelzebub explains that the points she earned from defeating the moose were automatically shared with him. Dean, stunned and speechless, remembers that it took him years to gain just one level, though Gilbert at level 18 and Morgan at level 15 are still far ahead. His new level 13 status means he no longer has to toil as a courier. After resting, Dean rises and starts getting dressed. Beelzebub asks about his next move, and he says he'll head back to the city since Marnie might be concerned for his safety. Confused by the mention of money, Beelzebub asks who she is. Dean, realizing he hasn't mentioned her, explains that Marnie is his only true friend, and without her, he'd likely be dead. He adds that Marnie always watches out for him, and even his magic sword was a gift from her. Curious, Beelzebub wonders if Marnie is a swordsmith, given the weapon's quality. Dean clarifies that Marnie is the granddaughter and heir of Gavin, a legendary blacksmith. 2 days later, Dean reaches a rundown city called Poor Man's Town. True to its name, the city is filled with slums, and most residents struggle to survive. Carrying Beelzebub in a pouch at his waist, Dean hears her remark on the city's bleakness, questioning how the heir of a great blacksmith like Marnie could live there. Dean explains that Gavin's gambling addiction drained his fortune. Beelzebub cautions him to lower his voice, noting the quiet area might make him stand out. At Marnie's shop, Dean is surprised to see a closed sign. Beelzebub suggests Marnie might be out, but Dean hears a voice inside, convincing him she's there. Ignoring the sign, he knocks and opens the door. Marnie, looking sad and cautious without checking who it is, says the shop is temporarily closed because she can't bring herself to work. Dean announces himself and asks to enter. Hearing his voice, Marnie's weary face lights up, and she rushes to greet him. Confused, Marnie asks if it's really Dean. He chuckles and confirms it's him. Overwhelmed, Marnie throws herself into his arms, crying with relief and joy at his return. Dean, blushing and flustered by her reaction, hears her explain that she hadn't seen him in a while. She visited the guild and was told he'd been reported dead. Devastated, Marnie shares that the news crushed her, and she couldn't bear the thought of never seeing him again, so she closed her shop. Dean, shocked, strokes her hair and apologizes for worrying her. Beelzebub, annoyed by the emotional display, shouts to ask if Dean and Marnie are romantically involved. Flustered, Dean denies it, insisting they're just childhood friends. Beelzebub teases him, laughing at his embarrassment, while Dean, irritated, swings her pouch and tells her to be quiet. Marnie then asks what Dean is trying to say. Calming down, Dean asks to come inside to explain everything. He apologizes for losing the magic sword Marnie made, but she reassures him that his safety matters more than the sword, praising his escape from the labyrinth without it. Suddenly, Dean pulls Beelzebub's core from his pouch to show Marnie, who admires its beauty. Curious, she asks if it's a typical demon core, but jumps in shock when Beelzebub's voice warns her not to touch it casually. Recognizing the voice from earlier, Marnie demands an explanation. Dean recounts meeting Beelzebub in the labyrinth, describing who she is and how their paths crossed with the demon. Marnie identifies Beelzebub as the major demon they're targeting, and Dean agrees, noting he saw her true form via tulpa and observed her immense strength as she defeated multiple attacks. Marnie questions Dean's intentions with the core, and when he seems confused, she warns that if the army discovers he has Beelzebub's core, he'll face serious danger. The power of a magical artifact like Beelzebub's core draws attention based on one's status, attracting soldiers, adventurers, and worse. Malth, a tyrannical magus officer ruling Roan Bluk, is mentioned. Beelzebub, unfamiliar with the concept of an army, prompts Dean to question if armies exist in her home oracle. He then describes his army's structure to her. Beelzebub explains that Ria's kingdom has 4 ranks: the king, the Marcus General, the magus officer, and regular soldiers, with the Marcus General leading all forces. Beelzebub proposes wiping out the army hunting her, but Dean rejects this, citing his body's inability to withstand the strain, as all army members are at least level 25. Beelzebub suggests raising Dean's magical level if it's too low, but he dismisses this as unrealistic. Marnie proposes selling Beelzebub's core as an item drop, estimating it could earn 300,000 dummies, tempting Dean since it equals 4 months' pay. However, Beelzebub, enraged by the idea, strikes Dean with her core, reminding him of his promise to treat her to Loomis's finest foods. Dean decides against selling Beelzebub's core for now, and Marnie assures him she'll back his choice. Later, at the Adventurers Guild to reverse his death report, Dean overhears Gilbert drinking and mocking him for dying. Ignoring warnings to avoid Gilbert, Dean, furious at the insults, confronts him, blaming Gilbert for nearly causing his death. Gilbert, shocked to see Dean alive, grows nervous and agitated. Gilbert demands to know how Dean survived when he was supposed to die, and Dean retorts that he nearly did, thanks to Gilbert using him as bait. Gilbert's friends question his story about protecting Dean in the labyrinth, and Dean insists the truth is different. Gilbert abandoned him and fled. To defuse the situation, Gilbert grabs Dean, faking tears of relief that Dean survived, and announces to the guild that Dean is back safely. Confused, Dean is unable to object as Gilbert puts an arm around his shoulder, appearing friendly. In reality, Gilbert is silencing Dean, dragging him out of the guild to a reserved tavern, urging him to order anything. Suspicious, Dean demands to know Gilbert's motives, and Gilbert admits he wants to keep quiet the fact that he used Dean as a decoy to avoid trouble. Dean warns Gilbert not to toy with him, but Gilbert insists he's serious, claiming no one was hurt, and that using Dean as bait saved them all. Enraged, Dean grabs Gilbert's collar, demanding if Gilbert truly believes such warped logic will convince him. Gilbert stays calm and questions Dean's next move. He warns Dean that if he shares the story, the guild will dismiss it and ruin Dean's own claims. With a wild grin, Gilbert points out that his status as an adventurer greatly overshadows Dean's, meaning Dean would lose if he tries to fight back. Gilbert then uses the threat of financial ruin to pressure Dean further. Angered, Dean insults him, but Gilbert offers a deal to join his party for regular pay, urging Dean to be mature and avoid risking his funds. Gilbert convinces Dean, who reluctantly agrees to stay quiet about the labyrinth incident, but only if Gilbert leaves him alone forever. Feeling defeated, Dean exits the tavern. On his way home, Beelzebub scolds him for giving in to simple taunts, noting that since Gilbert offered a meal, Dean could have at least enjoyed it, especially after accepting Gilbert's terms. She advises him to take Gilbert's advice and grow up. Dean, disheartened, admits he understands. He confesses that in his current state, he can't afford to skip a free meal. Having lost his courier job and now giving Gilbert a reason to resent him, Dean breaks down in tears, realizing he sacrificed too much for petty pride. Beelzebub comforts him, assuring him there are still options left. Beelzebub remarks that she appreciates the human vulnerabilities Dean shows. Through his tears, Dean shares his dream of becoming an adventurer and begs for her help. She agrees without hesitation but cautions him to learn upgrade tool magic to avoid trouble. She repeats that she doesn't mind people like him. Dean, grateful, visits Marnie's shop and humbly asks for a favor. Though he can't pay right away, he pleads for Marnie to craft a magical sword using Beelzebub's demon core. Marnie checks with Beelzebub, who admits it was her idea, adding that becoming a magical weapon in her orb form would be exciting. Marnie confesses she's never worked with a demon core like Beelzebub's before and worries her skills may fall short. Dean grabs her hand, reassuring her that no one else could do it, reminding her she trained under the legendary blacksmith Gavin and matches any smith in skill and passion. He expresses his trust in her. Marnie, blushing, teases him about the 10,000 pennies he still owes for her last work, but agrees to forge the sword, having promised to support him always. She warns, however, that she can only create a temporary device, as she lacks materials to fully unlock Beelzebub's true power. The next day, Dean sells all his valuable possessions to raise money for Marnie, wanting to lessen her burden despite her offer to forge the sword for free. He also sells magical devices he stole from Gilbert, earning 80,000 in total. Timmy, surprised by the sum, worries Dean did something reckless. Dean explains he'll live simply for a while. She teases that he could have promised to repay her 100 times over or vowed to make her happy instead. Dean admits most of the money came from selling Gilbert's magical items. Marnie, stunned, argues that stealing contradicts Dean's values, but he justifies it by revealing that Gilbert used him as bait to flee from a dangerous moose. This is the first Marnie learns of Dean's near-death experience, as he had previously omitted this detail. When she presses for more information, Dean brushes it off, assuring her it's no longer an issue. A few days later, Dean visits Marnie's shop to inspect the nearly finished sword, crafted from low-grade, ordinary materials. Despite this, Marnie created an impressive and striking weapon, with Beelzebub's core firmly set in the hilt's base. Beelzebub prompts Dean to evaluate the sword, and upon doing so, he learns it's named the Sword of Gluttony. This sword can absorb the powers of those it defeats and enhances Dean's own abilities with extra stat boosts. Marnie offers to forge another if he's unhappy with its design, but Dean insists it's perfect for his new weapon. He feels prepared to embark on his journey as a true adventurer. The next morning, while preparing breakfast, Dean asks Marnie to assist with setting the table. Marnie agrees, playfully remarking that they're acting like a married couple. Dean is caught off guard by her bluntness and nearly chokes. Marnie teases that he's now playing the role of the wife. After they finish the boiled white fish and mutton soup, Dean serves Beelzebub, now in her demon form, a plate of food. Her first bite is so delightful it feels like an explosion of flavors in her mouth. Unable to resist the taste, Beelzebub instinctively grabs the entire pot from Dean, who was about to serve himself, and consumes the whole breakfast in one gulp, leaving Dean and Marnie dumbfounded. Beelzebub raves about the perfect balance of sweet and sour notes, which complements the rich flavor of the white fish. She eagerly asks if there's more, but Dean, frustrated, strikes her with his sword and unleashes his torpor magic, causing her to vanish. As she fades, Beelzebub mourns losing the lingering taste of the meal, and Dean shouts that she should have eaten it slowly. Marnie chuckles at the scene and suggests Dean cook another meal, pointing out it's still early. Beelzebub, excited, asks what Dean will make next, but he sternly tells her to stay in the sword and think about her actions. Later, Dean and Marnie head to the Adventurers Guild. Marnie offers to join him to test the magical sword's capabilities and serve as his porter. Dean decides the labyrinth where he faced the moose is too risky for now, so they opt for the remote blue underground ruins to hunt D-ranked monsters. Marnie mentions a rumor about the Blue Ruins golden snail, also called the gold merm, spotted in the area. This peculiar monster, with its golden glow, is incredibly fast and hard to catch, but defeating it grants significant stat boosts and valuable materials. Exhausted from the long journey, Dean and Marnie finally reach the labyrinth. At the labyrinth, Dean asks Marnie which level the magical snail might inhabit. Based on rumors, she suggests it's likely on the second or third level, as the first level lacks notable monsters. She recommends starting on the second, and reminds Dean that while hunting the gold merm is a secondary goal, his primary focus should be testing his sword's performance. As they descend, they encounter a skeleton monster called Bone Man White, a level 14 creature that can detect magical energy around it. Dean feels confident he can defeat it, assuming it's a typical foe. However, Beelzebub cautions him not to underestimate it, noting that low-level monsters like Bone Man White lack intelligence, making them entirely aggressive. Beelzebub warns Dean that bluffing or begging won't help, urging him to call her if the situation worsens. Dean rushes at the Bone Man, but the creature easily deflects his sword with its clubs. He spots bloodstains on the clubs, realizing the Bone Man has killed before. Though fear begins to set in, Beelzebub's advice pushes him to keep fighting. Dean lands a hit on the Bone Man's shoulder bone, but the creature swiftly sheds its armor to strike back, barely blocked by Dean. He steps back to rethink his strategy, understanding he misjudged the Bone Man, a skeleton that feels no pain, making its counterattacks relentless and a single hit potentially deadly. Dean considers attacking the Bone Man's pelvis but decides against it, as it could fetch a good price. He also thinks about targeting the lower vertebrae, but a sword swing would be too slow and dangerous. Confused, he ponders his remaining options, sensing there might be one last way. Marnie offers help, but Dean refuses, determined to fight alone, believing that as an aspiring adventurer, especially against a white, he shouldn't rely on others. He charges again, landing a precise upward slash, and the Bone Man collapses. Marnie cheers, thinking Dean has won, but her joy fades as the creature struggles to rise. Dean assures Marnie the battle is over, explaining that whites lack the 5 senses and rely on sensing life force. He realizes he can now sense the life force around him, including Marnie's and his own, confirming his sword stole the Bone Man's ability to detect it. Now effectively blind, the defeated white lies before Dean, who stands triumphant after his hard-fought solo victory. Marnie beams with pride, but Dean remains modest, crediting himself, Marnie, and the Sword of Gluttony. His stats increase by 1 level after the fight. Marnie marvels at the Sword of Gluttony's ability to absorb enemy powers, still stunned by the clear proof she just witnessed. The sword, less humble than Dean, boasts that the victory was merely a small feat for the mightiest of the 7 deadly sins. Meanwhile, Dean busies himself collecting the white's femur bone, explaining it could sell for 5,000 dummies, enough to feed them for 5 days or more. The sword finds Dean's scavenging for survival disappointing, and Marnie notes that Dean's tough upbringing makes such behavior normal. She takes the femur, expecting to move on, but Dean returns to the monster to search for more. Dean explains that other parts of the bone man could sell for about 50 times less, enough for a single meal. Exasperated, Marnie urges him to drop the bones so they can move forward. They continue until the path splits into two. Marnie suggests taking the straight path, but Dean's newly gained powers activate. The ability he absorbed from the white lets him sense a D-class monster's odor on the left path. This auto-sense proves useful for hunting, similar to a search skill that locates nearby monsters, but it consumes less energy as a special trait rather than magic, even if Dean is reluctant to use it. Dean realizes he could excel as a porter with his skills, but his thoughts are interrupted when he and his team spot the auto he had sensed earlier, a gold mine notorious for its speed and difficulty to contain. Marnie struggles to block the creature, managing to redirect it toward Dean. With the monster in their grasp, Dean prepares to strike it down using the Sword of Gluttony. He lands a powerful blow, but the gold mine somehow slips away. Initially, Dean fears he missed his chance, but closer inspection reveals the creature's liquid splattered across the area, indicating a hit. Although Dean struck the monster, it may have escaped. He questions if his strike was too weak, but Monty reassures him it was precise enough to be lethal for most. The gold mine's resilience is well known, having thwarted many before. The Sword of Gluttony suggests the creature might have a unique ability allowing the blade to pass through it. Determined, Dean readies for another attempt, proposing they pursue the monster since his auto can track it. Marnie agrees, noting the creature's injury might weaken it. Meanwhile, Dean senses something else along the same path. Dean detects other adventurers also hunting the gold mine. He suspects they have a porter aiding their tracking. At first he mistakes them for the army, but their presence on this floor, not the fourth, suggests otherwise. To avoid conflict, Dean prefers steering clear of this group. He and Marnie are surprised when he senses the adventurers descend to the third level with the gold mine. Though initially discouraged, Monty reminds Dean of the monster's weakened state, and Dean motivates himself with words inspired by Swordmaster Sorrows. Dean, still ready for a fight, agrees with Marnie that they'll manage on the third level. Scanning again, he notices only one of the 3 adventurers previously chasing the gold mine remains. This doesn't mean the others are dead. Soon, Dean confirms they're alive. He recognizes one as Morgan, who is shocked to see Dean still alive. The other is Phil Anima, a cat beast folk. Dean realizes Phil's skills helped the group track the gold mine. Dean asks Phil if he's guild registered, and Phil says no. Noticing a severe wound on Phil's leg, Dean instructs Marnie to stop the bleeding. Phil, overly self-critical, blames himself for getting injured and slowing the group. Morgan and Gilbert, another adventurer who pressed on after the gold mine, are mentioned. Dean learns the boy's name is Carol and warns him about the exploitative nature of Morgan and Gilbert, who treat porters like slaves or bait in dangerous situations. Dean advises Carol to avoid their requests, no matter his financial struggles. Carol appreciates Dean's concern but clarifies he wasn't coerced into the quest. He joined willingly, lured by Morgan and Gilbert's promise to help him achieve his dream of becoming an adventurer. Morgan mocks Dean, boasting that Gilbert will soon return with the gold mine, dismissing Dean's efforts. Morgan's taunts sting, but he remains confident in his group's success, expecting Gilbert's imminent arrival. Dean boldly claims the monster is his to defeat, while Gilbert skillfully tracks down the gold mine until he traps it. Dean and Monty arrive just in time, and Gilbert decides to show off a bit. He tries casting an illusion spell to defeat the monster, but for some reason, the spell fails to work against it. Instead, Gold Murim pours poison on Gilbert's back. Despite this, Gilbert remains standing and brags to Dean that the gold mine is still his to claim, as capturing it would let him leave the adventurer's life behind. More importantly, it would make joining the army a realistic goal for him. Perhaps Gilbert should have focused less on his dreams and more on the reality unfolding before him, as a hobgoblin now grabs him by his weapon. The creature's immense strength easily throws Gilbert aside, making him realize he can't possibly win against it. In a desperate attempt to survive, Gilbert calls out to Dean, apologizing for their past conflicts and begging for help against the hobgoblin. Dean hesitates, weighing whether to assist, but the promise of money influences his decision. Marnie reminds Dean that Gilbert is a terrible person who is finally facing the consequences of his actions. After all, Gilbert once tried to kill Dean and willingly let Carol die instead of helping her. They should seize the chance to escape while they can. However, the hobgoblin isn't the only fearsome creature present. Dean's analysis reveals a level 20 hobgoblin, a level 10 goblin, and a level 30 gold merm. Together, these creatures form a formidable and deadly group. Marnie urges Dean to flee with her, suggesting they return for the gold mine later if that's his goal. However, she insists that Gilbert isn't worth saving. Dean takes a long look at Gilbert, sprawled helplessly on the ground. Marnie's words ring true, and if Gilbert dies here, no one would hold Dean responsible. Leaving him to die might be the best choice. Yet Dean wonders why his mind settles on one decision, but his body acts differently. As the hobgoblin swings its weapon at Gilbert, he believes he's doomed. When he opens his eyes, he's shocked to see Dean blocking the blow with his sword, surprising everyone, including Marnie, who voices her frustration. Gilbert calls Dean a friend and says he owes him his life, but Dean is in no mood for reconciliation. He shouts at Gilbert to leave and never return. Looking back, Dean probably should have chosen the safer path, as now he's surrounded by powerful monsters. Still, he feels content with his choice, knowing he would have regretted letting Gilbert die. Dean then resolves to emulate the sword master Arius, who never feels ashamed of his chosen path. Marnie snaps him back to reality, pointing out that this isn't a story where ideals can magically make someone stronger in battle. This fight requires real power, and Dean knows it, so he summons his trump card. Morty, the demon Beelzebub, emerges eagerly, as if she's been waiting for this moment. Beelzebub promises to handle the monsters as thanks for the soup Dean gave her earlier. However, she urges Dean to do more than just stand by and watch. The hobgoblin swings its club once, then twice, but misses Beelzebub with every strike. The demon effortlessly toys with the creatures, completely in control of the situation. As she glides effortlessly through the battlefield, striking vital blows with clever precision at the height of her excitement, she starts to fade. This catches her off guard, as she believes she still has some magical energy left. Glancing around, she spots Dean battling beside her and realizes why her magic has depleted so fast. With her task nearly complete, one hobgoblin remains, and her time is running out. Dean presses on despite his dwindling strength, wielding the Sword of Gluttony to unleash a fiery coil against the creature. He attempts to gut the hobgoblin with his sword, but it fails. Through quick thinking, Dean figures out that a fire-based attack like Flaming Coil won't work against a fire-type monster like the hobgoblin. A few goblins still linger, swiftly encircling Dean and trapping him in a tough spot. Marnie comes to his aid, despite her constant warnings against fighting. She steps in to ensure his survival, offering to take on one goblin while instructing Dean to deal with the one facing him. She easily defeats her isolated goblin, while Marnie casts a small flame, hurling a blazing stone at another goblin. The monster catches the stone too confidently, unaware of its true nature. Marnie slyly discloses that the stone is more than it seems, infused with magically condensed special ingredients. Whatever that implies, it spells trouble for the unsuspecting goblin, which explodes almost instantly, proving Marnie's clever victory. Dean seems to be enjoying the fight, though he's only battling to protect himself, yet he repeatedly lands in risky situations like this. With the goblin defeated, only two enemies remain before they can claim total victory: the hobgoblin and the gold mime. The hobgoblin fiercely charges at Dean, who defends with the Sword of Gluttony. Dean senses the ferocity of the enemy's strikes, but notices they've been recently enhanced, allowing him to keep pace with the hobgoblin. Now Dean must locate a weak point, but that's not his only challenge. He also has to dodge the poison projectiles launched by the gold mime. Battling both the hobgoblin and the gold mime overwhelms Dean. As before, Marnie steps in to help. She offers to handle the gold mime while leaving the hobgoblin to Dean. Teamwork proves effective, though Marnie's spells against the gold mime fail. She initially thinks the monster's shell nullifies magic, but Dean quickly corrects her, explaining that the gold mime avoids magic damage by retreating into its shell. Dean discovered this during a previous attack on the creature. He urges Marnie to focus on evading the monster's strikes. The gold mime goes on the offensive, launching multiple attacks that Marnie dodges effortlessly, as she could do this all day. However, she doesn't notice that the poison projectiles she avoids are heading elsewhere. Marnie dodges one projectile but sees it speeding toward Dean. She immediately warns him, and Dean, now alert, turns the situation to his advantage. He swiftly dashes forward, slicing through the hobgoblin's legs, leaving it unable to dodge the incoming poison due to its close range. Dean knows he won't get a better opportunity to defeat the hobgoblin. This is the weak spot he's been searching for. From behind, he drives the Sword of Gluttony through the hobgoblin, stabbing it in the back. The hobgoblin collapses, giving Dean the chance to use Flaming Coil again. Marnie's latest Petite Flame is another brilliant tactic in her expanding arsenal of clever battle moves. She uses it to obscure the gold mime's vision, allowing her to slip behind it undetected at close range. With her large hammer-like weapon, she smashes the gold mine like a golf ball, turning it into the very projectiles it had been launching all day. The powerful impact of her attack against the wall exposes the gold mine's core. Without its protective shell, the monster is completely defenseless. Having defeated his own opponent, Dean steps in to finish off the gold mine with the Sword of Glutton. He thrusts the sword through the creature, ensuring it pierces all the way through its body. With that, it's clear that Marnie and Dean have successfully taken down the gold mine, along with hobgoblins, goblins, and other creatures. All in a day's work. They share a high five to celebrate their victory. Exhausted, Dean collapses to the ground, which is no surprise. Who could have predicted that using a sword to stop one monster from killing another would lead to such an intense battle? Meanwhile, Marnie kneels beside Dean, her face filled with concern. She gently urges him to take better care of himself, even though he escaped danger this time. She's certain Dean will keep putting himself in risky situations, whether he means to or not. If his recklessness continues and their luck runs out, even a cat's 9 lives might not be enough to keep them alive. Marnie's worry is genuine, but she knows Dean's impulsive nature by now. Even if he promises to be careful, it won't be long before he drags them into another dangerous mess. Instead of asking him to stop, she asks Dean to only take such risks when she's there, so if they face death, they'll face it together. Dean is taken aback by Marnie's words and doesn't know how to respond. Silently, he vows to become an adventurer worthy of someone like Marnie, though he knows it's a long road ahead. They both realize they need to check their statuses to see their skill and level upgrades. Dean finds he's jumped from level 14 to 20, gaining new skills like Flaming Coil and Moon Mirage starting at level 20. Marnie isn't usually an issue, as it lets him fight more, defeat monsters, and eventually take them on alone. But the downside is that adventurers at this level face the highest death rates. This likely happens because they grow overconfident, no longer feeling like beginners. Many adventurers also stay stuck at level 20 forever. Dean mentally commits to staying cautious and humble moving forward. Marnie learns she's risen from level 7 to 12, earning points from the gold mine. Marnie invites Dean to check out her new stats and skills if he's curious. If this is her subtle way of flirting, it goes over Dean's head, as he insists people shouldn't rely on others' abilities. They shift their focus to the gold mine's remains scattered on the ground. They wonder if such a slimy creature could hold a magic bone. After sifting through the mess, Dean finds a gold magic bone inside the monster. He heads to the guild to trade items from the ruins for cash, selling only the fight bones from white goblins and hobgoblins, which earn him 80,000 coins. Dean feels the satisfying weight of his once empty bag, now heavy with coins, and it brings him real joy. Earning a month's courier salary in one day thrills him even more. Though adventuring carries risks, the rewards far surpassed his old job's pay. He recalls deciding not to sell the gold mine's bone, finding it too bulky and nearly leaving it behind. When Dean told Marnie he wasn't taking the gold mine's bone, she was stunned, especially since he'd been so eager about it earlier. He explained it was too large, but Marnie cut him off before he could finish. She asserted that her refining magic could shrink it and pointed out its value was 150,000 times greater. She also noted that her expertise as a master smith could transform it into magic-resistant gear, an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Marnie grew even more thrilled when Dean said she could keep it if she managed to take it home. He, along with Beelzebub, seemed fascinated by the gold mine. I asked what it might taste like. Back at the guild, Beelzebub, thrilled about their earnings, asked Dean if he could now fulfill her deepest wishes. Dean responded that with such wealth, he could even splurge on luxuries. Beelzebub brought up the cow they saw earlier, but Dean remarked that it had too much fat. The receptionist at the Adventurers Guild, seeing Dean seemingly talking to himself, wondered if he was just muttering alone. Dean suggested to Beelzebub that instead of eating an adult cow's meat, they should choose calf meat, which offers a better fat-to-meat ratio for optimal tenderness. They quickly left the guild to make their purchase. The puzzled receptionist mumbled to herself, calling Dean odd as she walked around. Dean noticed the shopping district's lively atmosphere compared to the dreary slums. Yet he knew the district's appealing look was largely a facade, as the military government office was nearby. Many shops served high-ranking officials and soldiers, so the roads and water systems were well kept. This attracted many to open businesses, but fierce competition often forced closures. Beelzebub commented that this was how competition worked, with the weak naturally eliminated. Dean, however, clarified that it wasn't so straightforward. Their discussion was cut short by a man's scream as 2 military tax collectors harassed him. The man, likely a shop owner, pleaded for leniency, saying he couldn't pay taxes because he needed money for his wife's medical care. He vowed to pay soon, but his pleas were ignored. The tax collector sternly reminded him that his contract required tax payments to keep his business. They warned that non-compliance would be deemed misappropriation by the army and cruelly suggested he sell his daughter into fund for funds. Onlookers and fellow merchants watched in silent dread, knowing they could soon face the same plight. Since Marty became the magazine officer, taxes had become oppressively high. Dean, wanting to avoid conflict, tried to slip away quietly, keeping his head down to avoid notice. Unfortunately, this backfired. The tax collectors called out, demanding to know his purpose. He said he was in town to buy recall meat, but they grew suspicious, noting the record stores were in the opposite direction. The tax collectors called his story dubious and abruptly asked what was in his bag, snatching it before he could answer. They pulled out his pouch and questioned if he really needed so much money for food. Dean explained it was payment, but they insisted the situation seemed even shadier. They cited a local theft report, noting the suspect's height matched Dean's, and asked him to come to the office for questioning and to inspect his magic gear. Fortunately, Fyodor, an old friend, arrived and vouched for him, saying he saw Dean exchanging money at the guild. Still, the tax collectors were set on detaining Dean, suggesting he might have sold stolen goods to cover his tracks. They reminded Fyodor, a former military officer, that criminals often use such tricks. Fyodor then approached one collector and whispered something. The collector's demeanor shifted abruptly, and he returned Dean's money with a salute to Fyodor. After the soldiers depart, the tax collectors follow suit. Dean expresses gratitude to Fyodor for clearing his name. Fyodor reveals that the soldiers often use intimidation to seize magical items. When Dean inquires what Fyodor said to sway them, Fyodor explains he merely threatened to report the incident to the army, knowing the soldiers had no real intention of escalating the matter by taking Dean to their office. The soldiers were only trying to resolve the issue on their own and extort Dean. Fyodor reminds Dean of the primary adventurer rule, never give soldiers cause to suspect you. He suggests Dean walk confidently to avoid drawing attention. Fyodor's mention of his adventuring rules brings a smile to Dean's face, recalling their first meeting 2 years ago. Fyodor was renowned among adventurers for donating half his earnings to charity and mentoring younger adventurers with success tips. He once invited Dean on an adventure, teaching him many adventuring rules during the journey. As they chat, a girl Dean hadn't noticed before suddenly interrupts, complaining they're too loud and threatening to leave if they don't hurry up. At first, the girl seems proud, bold, and distant. Curious, Dean asks Fyodor if he knows her, and Fyodor introduces her as a member of the Enro clan. The Enro clan, one of the most powerful among the Lagman clans, possesses extraordinary abilities gained through pacts with underworld creatures. Because of this, they live in secrecy, as others often try to exploit their powers for gain. The girl glares at Fyodor, warning him not to interfere in others' business, calling it annoying. Dean wonders why she's with Fyodor, who's from a nomadic tribe. Fyodor explains he's taking her, Edda, to the magic den tomorrow to teach her basic survival skills for navigating magical mazes. Dean notes the den's monsters are tough to hunt, but Fyodor shares a rumor that a C-tier crystal demon, Solus, was spotted there, suggesting Dean join them. Dean gets thrilled at the news, but Edda objects, arguing against bringing a low-level civilian like Dean. Angered, Dean shouts at her, accusing her of disrespecting Fyodor, who's only trying to help. Before Dean can finish, Edda charges and punches him in the stomach, sending him crashing into a wall, knocked out by the force. Realizing her mistake, Edda apologizes for losing control of her strength, explaining she's unused to interacting outside the Enro clan. After Dean recovers, Fyodor shares adventurer rule number 2 with him and Edda. Always maintain good relations with fellow travelers. He stresses that fighting among friends makes adventuring impossible. Fyodor then tells them to shake hands and make up, which they do reluctantly. The next day, Dean, Fyodor, and Edda ride a carriage to the magic den. Dean thanks Fyodor for arranging the transport, but Fyodor clarifies he did so to ensure no one reaches the crystal demon Solus before them. Curious, Dean asks about Solus. Fyodor explains that Solus is a tricky C-rank demon skilled in forging arts and matter manipulation. He notes demons are generally stronger than magical creatures of the same rank, and Solus, as a crane, exceeds typical creatures of his level. Fyodor shares that his goal is to help Dean and Edda advance their ranks, planning to let them face Solus alone, but promising to intervene if things get too dangerous. Dean warmly extends a handshake to Edda, but she sharply cautions him against touching her. hinting that the punch she landed on him yesterday would pale in comparison to what she could do. Her warning visibly unnerves Dean. Fyodor eases the moment's tension by noting that a group called the Cerberus Fang has been active nearby. I wonders if it's some kind of beast, but Fyodor clarifies that they're adventurers who track down and collect magical equipment. Rumors swirl that the Cerberus Fang, despite having only 3 members, wields at least 3 artifacts capable of utterly obliterating their targets' bodies. Fyodor shares that their skills are said to be so formidable they could wipe out even elite adventuring parties. He suspects his rival, Otrarder, known as the Poison Spider, was defeated by them, as she was no easy mark. Fyodor speculates that the Cerberus Fang likely ambushed Otrarder to bring her down. Still, he comforts Dean and Edda, saying adventurers can't survive by living in fear, and with him around, they'll be safe. Dean, thrilled, boasts that as an Uruk knight, she's perfectly capable of fending for herself without anyone's help. Noticing Edda's cheeks flush after her bold claim, Dean teases her, pointing out she can't conceal her embarrassment and advising her to watch her words. Flustered, Edda denies blushing and retorts, questioning how she could possibly be embarrassed over someone like Fyodor. In her irritation, she challenges Dean to a duel, despite Fyodor's efforts to calm things down. The two end up brawling regardless. Afterward, Dean's face is noticeably swollen, suggesting Edda gave him quite a beating. They pause for lunch, and when Dean asks Fyodor where he'll get ingredients, Fyodor surprises them by summoning a magical floating box with a magic item. Fyodor retrieves a frying spatula from the box, explaining it's a paradoxical item that can hold an endless array of items. He pulls out various cooking supplies, and Dean offers to cook. Soon, an ogre chicken pilaf is ready. Fyodor praises Dean's dish after one bite, but Edda grumbles that it took too long to prepare. Edda argues they could have just grilled the meat and drunk the milk, as it all ends up the same in their stomachs. She questions if they're here to mess around. Offended, Dean tries to reply, but Fyodor intervenes, citing the 3rd rule of adventuring. Sharing meals fosters understanding among companions. Fyodor elaborates that since adventurers never know which meal might be their last, they should savor every one with friends. He asks Edda if Dean's cooking is impressive, and she admits it's decent. Dean's respect for Fyodor grows, appreciating his knack for mediation. He also apologizes for Edda's attitude, suggesting she's still adjusting to their ways. As Dean is about to eat, Beelzebub telepathically demands her portion. Dean slips away to feed her privately. Later, at the Magic Den, Dean and Edda battle goblins on the 1st floor. During the fight, Dean seizes the chance to steal 2 goblin skills, Dark Step and Night Vision. One goblin attempts to escape, but Edda swiftly beheads it, leaving Dean stunned by her speed. Fyodor arrives to evaluate their combat skills, advising Dean to be more decisive, as small goblins should fall with one blow. Dean wants to explain that the Sword of Gluttony slows him down, but since he doesn't yet trust Edda, he keeps it to himself. Fyodor commends Edda for her explosive use of battle energy, transforming it into a high-speed combat move known as Instant Cut. He's impressed and envious that someone her age could perfect such a skill. He urges Dean to match her pace, noting their need to keep up. Dean, feeling proud yet envious of the praise Edda receives, vows to soon demonstrate his own abilities, but Edda dismisses him, saying she expects nothing from him. Fyodor chuckles, playfully noting how well the group is bonding. Upon reaching the 2nd floor, he shares adventurer rule number 4, always scout the environment to avoid unexpected monster encounters. He points out a substance on the floor called zombie moose mucus, explaining that zombie moose are formidable creatures that travel in packs, making it wise to avoid them. Fyodor suggests a brief detour, mentioning that a tracking specialist would make it unnecessary, though he keeps his own tracking skills hidden for now. As they venture deeper into the den, Fyodor's adventuring rules prove valuable, but Edda seems distracted, not fully attentive. Instead of looking bored, Edda appears fixated on something distant as Fyodor warns they've reached the 3rd floor. Dean activates his odo-sensor, and soon they spot an injured girl lying helplessly. Fyodor hurries to assist, but Dean's sensor detects a trap. 2 figures lurk behind a nearby rock. Before Dean can alert Fyodor, the girl grins wickedly and attacks. Instantly, a skill transforms the area into a swamp. The 2 hidden figures emerge, and Fyodor identifies all 3 as members of the Cerberus Fang. He confirms to Dean and Edda that the trio, a young girl with an eye patch, a slender man, and a plump man wielding a club, are indeed part of this group. The 3 laugh at the name Cerberus Fang, agreeing it suits them. The slender man boasts it's their lucky day for capturing Fyodor, the Wind Traveler, but the girl sharply claims Fyodor as her prize, warning the man to back off. Fed up with their banter, Edda swiftly moves to attack. Edda triggers her magic stone bullet, firing it directly at the trio. Fyodor, unruffled, summons a powerful whirlwind that halts the stone and reduces it to dust. The plump man is stunned by how effortlessly his magic was countered. Fyodor mocks his surprise, explaining that his gale blast slices through anything. Fyodor then shapes the wind around his spear, forming a lance of air. Sensing danger, the plump Cerberus Fang member panics and tries to flee, abandoning his allies, but Fyodor's wind lance strikes, piercing his torso and killing him instantly. The remaining two members freeze in terror. Fyodor calmly reminds Dean and Edda of Adventurer Rule Number 8, show no mercy to hostile foes. He swiftly beheads the slender man before he can react, then cites Rule Number 10, eliminate enemies before they can act. The last Cerberus Fang member, the girl, collapses, pleading for her life in fear. She promises to obey Fyodor and surrender peacefully if spared, but her words go unheeded. Fyodor coldly recites Rule Number 11, never fall for the enemy's ploys, and stabs her with his spear. Dean watches in horror, shaken to his core, as it's his first time witnessing a human kill another. Fyodor is speechless after defeating the Cerberus creature and checks if anyone is injured. Dean confirms they're okay but starts to say Fyodor went too far, only for Fyodor to interrupt, advising Dean to save his feelings for after he's done eliminating his foes, noting he'll only harm himself otherwise. Dean suggests reporting the casualties, but Fyodor stresses they must first take down the crystal demon, reminding Dean that death is a frequent reality in their work. Soon after, giant rats chase the team on the 3rd floor, but they find a safe spot to hide. Dean blames Edda, saying her desire to hunt a lone rat caused the chase as it called its pack. Dean explains that targeting higher-level monsters is more effective for leveling up and points out that if Edda had followed Fyodor's advice, they'd have avoided trouble. Edda, grabbing Dean's collar, insists she needs to grow stronger, unlike Dean, whom she calls lazy. Fyodor steps in to stop their fight, warning Edda against using her magic sword. Fyodor notes the sword is a better weapon, too advanced for Edda's level, and suggests she switch to another. Edda objects, saying Edda refuses to use a different magic sword, warning that continued use will strain her body. Edda dismisses the concern, stating it's a clan matter she won't discuss further. Dean apologizes for blaming her and suggests she rest, but Edda, flustered, shouts she only slowed to match his slow pace before storming ahead. Dean calls for her to stop, and she turns to ask what's wrong. She then collides with an adventurer's corpse, pierced by an iron spike from the ground, which Fyodor identifies as iron alchemy. As Dean questions this, the crystal demon appears, welcoming them to a death-themed art exhibition and introducing itself as a servant of the demon god Manhwa. Fyodor orders the team into position, warning them to keep their eyes on the demon. Beelzebub reacts to the crystal demon, telling Dean it kills for sport, not food, and urges him to defeat it quickly, questioning its crude appearance. Fyodor reminds Dean and Edda of their strategy. They'll fight, and he'll intervene only if necessary. The crystal demon unleashes a poison gas attack, and Fyodor, seeing the younger fighters struggle, uses a blast spell to hold back the gas. His wind magic pushes Edda and Dean back, causing Dean to fall. While down, Dean scans the crystal demon's stats, revealing its dangerous abilities, including Trick Dove, which launches homing dove-shaped projectiles. Surprised they survive the gas, the demon shifts focus to Edda, firing 3 dove projectiles. Edda deflects them, readying herself with a burst of energy. Edda charges, slicing through the projectiles swiftly. Another comes from below, but she cuts it down. Stepping on a sharp stone, she injures herself and, overwhelmed by pain, struggles as a final projectile nears. Fyodor rushes in, deflecting it just in time. The crystal demon, enraged by Dean's ability to block its attack, faces Dean as he turns to Edda, admitting he doesn't know her past but shares her desire to grow stronger, begging her to fight alongside him as he needs this opportunity too. Edda, with a scoff, tells him he'd better not slow her down. The crystal demon then summons a portal, firing a flurry of sharp stakes. Dean dodges them without assistance, while Edda seizes the moment, using Dean as a distraction to launch a surprise attack on the demon. The demon, expecting her move, counters with a blast that sends Edda tumbling, though she quickly recovers, hiding her concern. Dean shouts Edda's name, but she brushes it off, insisting rooks aren't weak. The crystal demon, calling itself the Nimbus area of demons, warns them not to underestimate its power, noting its attacks are paused but will soon recharge, questioning if they'll flee or die in agony. Ada prepares to strike again, but Dean, frustrated, calls her foolish, reminding her they're a team. He dismisses her tough act or rook teachings, vowing not to let her get hurt more. The demon mocks their supposed friendship, while Ada tries to explain to Dean there's no other way. Dean cuts Ada off, insisting there is another way, flashing her a grin. The crystal demon, its magic fully recharged, taunts them about their next move, stunned as Dean and Ada charge directly at it. Disappointed by their apparent lack of strategy, the demon unleashes its stakes. Ada suddenly darts ahead of Dean, kneels, and urges him to go. Ada lifts her sword horizontally above her head, allowing Dean to use it as a springboard to leap into the air toward the crystal demon. As the demon fires a stake at Dean's forehead, he turns to smoke, revealing it's a mirage from his shadow mirage skill. Shocked by the deception, the crystal demon has no time to react as the real Dean emerges from behind, striking its head with his sword. The demon reels, sensing its power draining, and realizing Dean's role, grabs him angrily, demanding to know what he did. Before Dean can answer, Ada hurls a stake she pulled from the ground, striking the demon down. As Dean and the demon crash, Ada remarks she's settled her debt. Dean, on the ground, asks her to finally use his name. Ada, thinking he was just a courier, admits he's more capable than she thought. Dean, smiling, thanks Ada for the save and offers his hand to help her up, but she, embarrassed, tells him not to misread her, only admitting he's more skilled than she assumed. She warns him against getting clingy, and Dean grins, feeling he's starting to understand her. Fyodor suddenly interrupts, praising their victory over the demon. Ada smirks, claiming Dean was useless, so she aimed for the final blow. Dean wonders if the order would have aided him without using Moon Rouge. Fyodor then asks Ada to collect the demon core under Dean's watch, making her nervous as she's never done it before. Dean challenges Yoder's seriousness, prompting Fyodor to ask what's wrong. Dean points out that Eda's strength is already valuable to their group, suggesting it would be quicker if he handled the demon core extraction himself. Fyodor, however, insists that everyone needs to learn all skills. Dean agrees but argues that now might not be the best moment for this lesson. With her hand injured, Fyodor brushes off Dean's concern and orders him to proceed. Dean reluctantly complies, guiding Eda on carefully peeling back the demon's skin layers. Eda grows annoyed at Dean's persistent instructions. Meanwhile, Dean's thoughts wander to the trio they defeated earlier, finding it odd that Cerberus Fang, a group supposedly capable of taking down a top-tier party, sent 3 members who were defeated so easily. Dean reflects on how strange it was when the girl spoke, as if she was unfamiliar with the name Cerberus Fang, even suggesting it sounded fitting, like it was new to her. He also finds it bizarre that he, of all people, is teaching Eda how to extract a demon core, despite her being stronger than him. In that moment, Dean's distraction nearly costs him, but he senses someone approaching. He spins around, shocked to see Fyodor raising his sword to attack Eda from behind. Thanks to Dean's quick reflexes, he pushes Eda out of harm's way, narrowly avoiding the strike. They tumble across the ground, leaving Eda more injured and dazed, struggling to grasp what just happened. Her shock deepens. Fyodor, watching, is amused that his attack missed despite concealing his presence. He praises Dean's sharp instincts and probes if he's hiding any secrets beyond Otto's censor. Dean grapples with a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, disbelief, and confusion, unable to fathom Fyodor's motives. He finally demands to know why Fyodor is doing this. With a sinister smile, Fyodor reveals he is Cerberus Fang. Dean and Eda are stunned, unable to process his words. Dean argues that one person couldn't possibly commit the crimes attributed to Cerberus Fang. Fyodor laughs, admitting he's right, and explains he used stolen magic tools to destroy victims' bodies, creating the illusion of multiple culprits to evade suspicion. He adds that exhausting them both beforehand was a smart move. Since both have instant cutting and Otto's answer, Fyodor boldly asks Dean about the source of his powers, curious about how and where he gained them. Dean ignores the question, instead recalling a moment 3 years ago, asking if Fyodor remembers approaching him at the guild. Back then, Dean was weak, poor, and friendless, ignored by all except Fyodor. Fyodor, slightly irritated, admits his kindness was a facade, part of his role to keep up appearances and gather intel on adventurers. Dean, struggling to accept this, reminds him that Fyodor was the one who saved him. Fyodor's guidance gave Dean hope, fueling his belief that the legendary swordmaster might exist. Dean, tears streaming down his face, demands Fyodor surrender. He can't hold back his emotions as Fyodor confesses he's always despised Dean for clinging to what he sees as a foolish fairy tale, while Edda, silently watching, takes in the scene. She steadies herself and channels her energy, activating the magic sigil while urging Dean to forget Fyodor, as killing him is their only chance to survive. Fyodor, hearing her words, smirks and tells Edda she's gotten faster, but questions what she can achieve with an incomplete instant. As he speaks, Fyodor summons his brain magic, transforming a sphere with swirling gusts into a deadly winter, and remarks that an untrained fighter's best move is to stay predictable, noting her body is at its limit. Beelzebub sees Dean frozen in despair and admits to him that Fyodor might be correct. She says the tale of Zagreus might just be about a man, but it doesn't matter since the dream Dean holds from it is real, and that's what matters. Fyodor interrupts, telling them to stop their mentor-student act, declaring them his prey from now on. Before he finishes, he's ambushed from behind by both pupils in her human form, an elder using the instant cut skill amid a blast of wind. Undeterred, both girls press forward. Beelzebub warns Edda not to interfere, but Edda retorts that she doesn't follow Beelzebub's orders, asserting she's a noble warrior, not a child. Beelzebub pushes through the wind blast to strike. Fyodor plants his spear into the ground, triggering his arrow guard skill to unleash windfall defenses. Edda is thrown off, sent flying in another direction. Fyodor compliments their moves but urges them to surrender as their attacks won't reach him. He's surprised that someone like Dean can wield a toolbar, sensing something profound behind the low-tier spell. Turning to Beelzebub, he demands to know who she is. She starts to answer, but Dean cuts her off, unleashing a new skill from the Crystal Demon, launching fiery dove projectiles at Fyodor, who deflects them with his spear. Edda tries to question Dean's ability to use the skill, but Beelzebub and Edda attempt a sneak attack from behind. Fyodor easily evades their strikes, hitting Beelzebub with his spear's base. She swings her sword again, but he activates his hearted skill, turning his fingers to metal to deflect her blade. To her shock, he punches her, sending her flying. He then charges at Dean, who spins to dodge, but Fyodor's spinning attack slams Dean against a wall. Dean, barely standing, props himself up with his sword. Fyodor uses Emma to evaluate Dean's skills, learning he's at level 22, higher than expected since their earlier party formation. Fyodor speculates there's a reason for Dean's rapid level increase, concluding his magic sword is likely the cause. He mocks Dean, calling it odd for a talentless nobody to become a true adventurer, and taunts him about being a hero by mere chance. Fyodor continues to demean Dean, dubbing him Mr. Jackpot, insisting people like him should stick to menial tasks. Enraged, Fyodor charges to stab Dean with his spear. Dean, drained and defeated, stands ready to accept his fate. Just before the fatal strike lands, Beelzebub arrives, blocking the spear with her hands. Fyodor questions why she protects Dean, and she replies it's because his cooking is a rare treat. Beelzebub has no specific motive beyond preferring to fight alongside Dean, whose immense strength she finds far more appealing than aligning with someone like Fyodor. She hurls Fyodor through the air, relentlessly striking him with a flurry of punches as he struggles to evade her attacks. Fyodor manages to shatter his iron arm guards and declares Beelzebub's defeat, but when she kicks his stomach, the blow has no effect. Georgia seizes Beelzebub's legs, boasting of his hardened skill, and uses her legs to lift her into the air before slamming her painfully to the ground. Undeterred by the pain, Beelzebub swiftly grabs dirt from the ground and throws it into Fyodor's eyes, briefly blinding him. She leaps up for another attack, aiming a flying kick, but Georgia, despite his closed eyes, senses her approach, plants his spear in the ground, and reactivates his arrow guard. Realizing Beelzebub targeted his eyes to disrupt his focused hardening, Fyodor notes his arrow guard should counter it, yet he's stunned as Beelzebub pushes through the wind barrier, grinning widely and taunting that she'll break through his technique no matter how often he uses it. Her words are cut off as Georgia dispels the arrow guard with a shoulder charge, using her momentum to thrust his spear into her. Smirking, he activates a skill that spins the spear's tip, rapidly dragging Beelzebub along. Fyodor laughs, explaining the skill creates a vacuum zone of compression for ultra-fast rotation. He tells Beelzebub she'll be crushed to dust, but she remains unfazed, laughing maniacally. Her voice turns sinister and demonic as her body transforms, and she mocks Fyodor, questioning his pretense of power while wielding a demon's remnants. Beelzebub grips the spear's shaft tightly to halt its spinning, calling Fyodor arrogant. Terror grips Fyodor as he watches her grow from a small girl into a massive demonic monster. Sensing his fear, she warns that any hesitation will lead to her tearing him apart, just like his confidence. Fyodor grits his teeth, unable to look away from the monstrous Beelzebub. She taunts him about his staring contest but asks if he's forgotten something critical. As Fyodor realizes he didn't fully incapacitate Dean, Dean charges from behind, slashing Fyodor with his sword, wounding him and destroying the spear. Unable to sustain her demonic form, Beelzebub vanishes, urging Dean to end the fight properly. Fyodor, devastated by his spear's destruction and his partner's spell breaking, furiously kicks Dean's face, sending him crashing down. He berates Dean, revealing the spear was a priceless weapon worth millions and condemning him for breaking it. As Dean crawls away, Fyodor stomps his head, mocking him as a broken man dependent on his girlfriends and a sword gifted by his blacksmith friend, claiming a worthless person like Dean could never earn such a weapon. Dean clutches his sword tightly, declaring it symbolizes his and Marnie's hope, vowing never to surrender it to Fyodor in his rage. Fyodor shouts that if Dean refuses to surrender the sword, he will face death. As Fyodor prepares to attack, she suddenly appears, shocking everyone by severing Fyodor's arm. Dean, relieved to see her unharmed, is calmly reassured by her that she's okay. Together, Dean and she stand united, ready to confront Fyodor as a team. Fyodor, with a smirk, calls forth his magical box and tells Dean and Edda that they've driven him to his breaking point, admitting that without the weapon he's about to wield, he would have already been defeated. From the box, he pulls out a weapon that Edda instantly identifies as a magical lyre, its power radiating intensely, sensed by both Dean and the massive Edisons. Just as Dean begins to suggest retreating, Fyodor unleashes a new ability called Grab a Door, causing a gravitational force to plummet from the sky, devastating the surrounding area. Dean and Edda narrowly escape the destructive pull, watching as the terrain around Fyodor crumbles into ruins. Fyodor reveals that the magical lyre's Cold Haven ability, which he stole from his rival, the Poison Spider and Richard, is behind the destruction. Dean reasons that although the spell appears formidable, its slow-moving gravitational field can be dodged with enough speed, rendering it less dangerous. Fyodor, somehow reading Dean's thoughts, unveils another skill called Dark Arrow, transforming his light into a bow and firing dark energy shaped like an arrow. Edda, a demon, barely evades the attack, but Fyodor, frustrated by their persistence, calls them stubborn fools and questions whether they realize their resistance is futile. Dean, undeterred, continues to strategize, confident he's close to finding a way to counter Fyodor's abilities, believing that breaking through either Grab a Door or Dark Arrow could lead to victory. Suddenly, Edda calls out to Dean, explaining that a single spell can counter the gravitational force, but it requires assistance from the caster and a journey into Fyodor's past. In his youth at an orphanage, Fyodor was a cheerful big brother who cherished the other children as family, watching over their safety with a sense of home. During his childhood, Fyodor had a special friend named Ash, whom he eagerly shared his daily experiences with, always excited to see her. As the oldest child in the orphanage, he felt a duty to protect the other kids, whom he saw as younger siblings despite their diverse backgrounds. Ash held a unique place in his heart among the children, often causing him the most trouble, but he loved the orphanage and every child in it for the sense of belonging it gave him. This love drove his ambition to become a great adventurer like Zagreus, earning wealth to support the orphanage he cherished. Fyodor's dream mirrored Dean's, and even when it overwhelmed Ash, causing her to doubt herself, he consistently encouraged her, praising her hard work and kindness. He promised she could join him as an adventurer, vowing to teach her many things, much like Dean or others would. Fyodor believed giving back would be simple, but life proved otherwise, showing him it wasn't so bright. Growing up in an orphanage, he learned life differed greatly from his dreams, especially with no money. Without funds, he couldn't afford magical combat training to become a grand adventurer. Starting at the lowest carrier rank, he struggled to escape his dire situation. Exhausted in body and soul from daily grueling work, someone still brought him joy. That person kept him grounded, preventing him from losing himself during 3 years of hardship. Since leaving the orphanage, she stayed by his side, always greeting him with a warm smile and admiring eyes. Despite their financial struggles, she remained thankful to Fyodor for providing her shelter, unable to become an adventurer herself, and recalled her joy when he invited her to live together. She vowed to one day repay his generosity, no matter the cost. Soon, the good times faded as the orphanage's management reduced care for the children. The manager, Father Lars, even sent orphans to work in a brothel, enraging Fyodor. Confronting Father Lars, he discovered the changes stemmed from a new Magnus officer's policies in the city. The new officer, Marty, cut funding to many institutions, including the orphanage, to focus on expanding the army. Challenging Father Lars' actions, Fyodor learned a merchant tied to the military mediated between the orphanage and the brothel, revealing the plan as an army-backed relief effort. Feeling powerless, Fyodor vented his frustration at Father Lars, noting the orphans had no protection after leaving. He saw no relief in the plan, believing the army and merchant conspired, with Lars complying. After his outburst, Father Lars reminded him the army's authority, symbolizing the kingdom's strength, was undeniable. Apologizing for his helplessness, Fyodor watched the corrupt system tarnish his memories and resolved to gain power, learning it required distrusting the army and having wealth. Earning money, however, demanded power, so he aimed to become a B-rank adventurer who could earn vastly more. For someone without magic like him, this seemed unattainable. At Yerosatom, he faced mockery and scorn from other adventurers who called him the beggar brat. Seeking magic gear or combat lessons there, he was ridiculed, toyed with, and expelled. One day, a squad leader offered him magic gear and lessons if he could survive an expedition and meet a condition. Thrilled his persistence succeeded, Fyodor shared the news with Ash about his new mentor, eager to master fighting skills and promising to show her. She urged him not to overexert himself, but he often returned battered. Though Ash supported him, when he prepared for another adventure, Robina, worried, begged him to stop, warning further risks were dangerous. Too consumed by his quest for power, he told her to return to the orphanage if she was afraid. His heart had little space left for compassion, consumed instead by deception. All he could think about was the lies and how Lissac had promised to sell him a magical drink, forcing him to secure it during this one journey. Unwilling to give up, Ash insisted on joining the expedition, determined not to abandon him, no matter what. Her deepest fear was losing Short, the friend she had grown up with, and she refused to let that happen. Noticing the determination in Ash's eyes, he apologized and invited her to come along just one more time. This would be her final adventure before stepping back. Losing Ash left him even more resentful, and the harsh reality before him only worsened his bitterness. When he returned with the money he had promised Isaac, the other adventurers were stunned, as they had never taken him seriously. Instead of honoring their deal, Isaac belittled Fyodor further, spitefully asking why he hadn't just died. Fyodor's success in bringing the money and completing the expedition caused Isaac to lose a significant bet to the other adventurers. In response, Isaac refused to provide the magical cure and scornfully expelled Fyodor, furious over losing Ash and being deceived by lies. Fyodor bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment to retaliate during an adventure. He tracked Lisette, who had been tricked by a merchant's fake map, leading to the destruction of his entire party. Eliza, believing he was fortunate to survive, planned to start anew with a different group. But Fyodor didn't give him a chance to rethink his plans, emerging from the shadows to fatally stab Isaac in the neck. In doing so, Fyodor lost a piece of himself, realizing he could have taken this path to gain equipment and levels without endangering Ashley's life. At that moment, he vowed to abandon his dream of becoming a noble and respected adventurer. In his eyes, life had taught him that those he cherished couldn't be shielded by empty promises. He concluded that he was powerless to save anyone and regretted not realizing it sooner, as it might have spared Ash from death. With the one person he valued most gone, he clung to her memories. Meanwhile, Dean, unwilling to let him go unchecked, had already devised a plan with Edda to confront him. With their strategy set, Dean and Edda approached a furious Fyodor who relentlessly unleashed attacks and spells, intent on eliminating them swiftly. As Dean dodged some of the blows and struck back, Fyodor prepared to deliver a final strike. But before he could, Dean used a deceptive skill he had stolen from Solus to outmaneuver him. Fyodor accused Dean of being a fraud for using another's skill. Frustrated with the ongoing fight, Fyodor resolved to end it by casting a gravity spell to make Dean disappear, leaving only dust behind. Unable to breach the gravitational barrier, he activated the spell and fled. Unbeknownst to him, Dean and Edda had anticipated his move. Edda had observed something from Fyodor's previous use of the Gravedigger skill. It blocked all substances within its range, even the light in the maze they were navigating while escaping the gravitational pull. Fyodor's silhouette vanished into the dark wall, becoming impossible to discern. Based on this, Edda deduced that Fyodor likely couldn't see their silhouettes from the other side either. The deafening roar of the shattered ground suggested that his vision and hearing were completely cut off during the spell. Their plan was to approach Fyodor, provoke him into casting the gravity spell from a distance above, then use the gravitational pull to close in and strike decisively. Dean was initially skeptical of the plan due to the significant risk it posed to Edda, whose body would suffer severe damage. However, since breakfast was routine for her, They proceeded, though things didn't seem to be going as planned until an attack was triggered from above. The assault caused an explosion on the ground below, engulfing them completely in dust. As the dust settled, Dean strained to see if Edda's attack had succeeded. When it cleared, he saw that Fyodor had narrowly lost an arm, which lay on the ground, but it wasn't enough. Fyodor praised their attempt to use gravity against him, then, furious and full of energy, turned to Dean. He charged, warning Dean that he was next and intended to seize the magic blaze they possessed. Dean had no intention of surrendering his swords, but Fyodor was confident he could take them by force, unable to imagine losing to someone like Dean. Meanwhile, earlier, Fyodor encountered his younger self in Dean, a boy who dreamed of becoming Zagreus someday, and invited that boy to join him on an adventure. Fyodor's confidence was misplaced as Dean drove his sword into Fyodor's chest. Just as Fyodor had claimed, Dean stood no chance against him, being one of the best. This raised the question of whether there was any other path forward. Defeated, Fyodor stood by his teachings and, having lost, asked Dean to finish him off. Fyodor taunted Dean further, questioning what would happen if he found an opening and struck with a hidden magic weapon. He urged Dean to deliver the final blow, insisting that any sympathy for an enemy should come after their death, a lesson meant to bring closure. Dean grappled with a question that had haunted him since the betrayal, asking if it was truly necessary for Fyodor to teach them everything only to betray them later. Fyodor revealed his disdain for Oreos and the Sword Master's tale, believing those who buy into such fairy tales would soon face life's harsh reality. Fyodor believed no hero could emerge from their kingdom due to its inherent flaws. Dean, however, stood firm in his dream, uncaring if it was a fairy tale, determined to become Zagreus. His resolve surpassed Fyodor's, and with this realization, Fyodor gave Dean his approval to proceed. Before Dean could strike the final blow, an explosive interruption revealed Ken, arriving via the magazine Spectre. Ken had been tracking Fyodor for some time, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike and apprehend him. Dean, unfamiliar with the figure, explained that the magazine Spectre ranked just below Marty, who oversaw Rome under Fyodor, noting the suspiciously convenient timing. Dean asked if Ken had suspected Fyodor of being part of Cerberus' Fang, but that wasn't the case. Marty had been trailing Fyodor for years, waiting for him to accumulate enough wealth and goods to seize everything legally and bolster his own power. A soldier noted the presence of civilians, and Ken callously suggested killing them and blaming Cerberus' Fang. He also used this to provoke Fyodor, offering him the choice to die then and there to prevent the army from slaughtering civilians, goading him into a reaction. Ken mocked Fyodor, claiming he could have challenged them if not for Solus's presence, which cost him the fight against Dean and Edda. Fyodor, provoked, took the bait, and Ken stomped on his face, killing him in the process. Fyodor grappled with the reality of Fyodor's loss of a small portion of fries, prompting the army to exit the maze with the order's core and sword, leaving the dew behind. Relieved by their departure, Fyodor collapsed from the pain and damage she endured during the attack. Noticing her exhausted state, Dean offered his shoulder for support as they navigated out of the maze, while she quietly warned him not to try anything foolish. As they departed, Dean recognized that her final act of standing up for Edda was not just a victory in battle but left her isolated once more. Regarding the spoils, Solus's magic core rested on the broken magic spear, and they still needed to decide how to split the profits once it was sold. Dean noted that selling the magic spear would be challenging and offered his assistance, to which she eventually agreed, mentioning she might need a favor later when he advanced to higher levels toward the house. Edda ended up carrying Dean home on her back, handing him over to Manny's care before continuing her solitary journey. Marnie shared with Dean how surprising it was to see him return in such a state. Dean brushed it off with a laugh, explaining that when they left the maze, it was Edda who needed support, but they were attacked by a zombie moose on the way back, resulting in his injury. Marnie expressed her gratitude, noting she owed him, and their conversation touched on sensitive topics. Rumors had spread about the guild, particularly regarding Cerberus, with the public narrative claiming the army captured Fyodor and rescued 2 adventurers under his attack. Dean then clarified the motivations behind his actions. He explained that after the army cut funding for the city's institutions, Fyodor had begun making substantial donations from each raid to offset the reductions. Dean couldn't help but worry about the orphanage children now that Fyodor was gone. Molly, pulling him back to reality, reminded him that challenging the army was unthinkable, leaving Dean frustrated by his current powerlessness against their actions. Meanwhile, Marnie successfully sold some of the magic bones they brought back, 4 goblin bones for 20,000 pennies and 2 zombie moose bones for 80,000, totaling 100,000 pennies. This amounted to a 50,000 penny profit per person, which Dean considered a solid gain, though the calculations were far from over. Edda's demon core was valued at around 200,000 pennies, a figure that shocked Dean when he realized its worth. The price of Fyodor's magic spear was estimated at about 750,000 dummies, given its status as C-rank magic equipment made with animal metal, featuring a demon called Bane Spear and Bone Storm Wolf components, all high-quality items. Together, these could fetch up to 1,050,000 dummies, and the profit would have been even higher if the army hadn't confiscated Havel. Suggestions arose to use the money to purchase an entire ritual, as one couldn't be raised there. Dean proposed to Beelzebub that they instead buy a variety of delicious dishes in Lumi, leading the group to explore the city, shopping for food and clothes for Dean while enjoying its vibrant atmosphere. Dean began to reflect on how long it had been since he last went shopping with money and spent time with her in the city. As the two grew closer, savoring the pleasant atmosphere, Beelzebub interrupted at a pivotal moment. Though briefly starstruck, Beelzebub humorously remarked that love on an empty stomach was unbearable, prompting them to head to a restaurant. There, they sampled fresh lobster liver sashimi and other dishes. Beelzebub praised the meal, noting the creamy and greasy textures that made their cheeks feel as if they were melting from delight. Dean watched as Marnie warned him not to eat the food, suspecting it might be poisoned. Only Beelzebub, being a demon, could safely consume it without fear of poison. Marnie suggested cooking it first to be safe, but Beelzebub ignored the advice and playfully shoved the food into Dean's face. Meanwhile, at the Magnus building, the convener questioned Marty about whether Otto met his expectations, noting that the order level was 42, far higher than anticipated. The Magnus officer refused to increase Marty's level and was more curious about who could have defeated the powerful Aroma Berg, eager to collect them as well. When Ken couldn't provide any details about the pair, Marty angrily dismissed him and assigned another Magnus inspector to track them down, determined to add them to his collection. Edda declined to join a party with Dean, who pointed out their inability to get along and their significant strength differences as reasons. Recognizing the futility of convincing her, Dean stopped trying and wished her well. Still, they agreed to remain allies for the time being, which felt like a mutual parting of ways. With the guild, Dean planned to find a new team member but didn't want to appear desperate, so he decided to post about his search and leave for the day. He had specific requirements for his new partner: someone with compatible goals, a similar skill level, and trustworthy enough to share the secret of his sword. Dean knew his expectations might be unrealistic as he reviewed his list. The guild receptionist noted that Dean was seeking both a fighter and a courier. With Marnie too busy and Dean having already ruled out Guild Bold from his mental list, his options were limited. Still, he lingered at the guild, hoping for of luck. After some time, Dean was close to giving up when he heard a familiar voice. To his surprise, Edda, the last person he expected, appeared behind him. She teased him about his lack of capable, willing partners and then offered to join his team, feeling a bit sorry for him. Dean realized that Edda's kind, a group clan, typically only associated with their own, which likely explained her initial reluctance to join. Desperate for options, Dean was open to the idea. They sat down to discuss their partnership terms, with Dean mentioning his plan to add another member. He explained that going in alone would be too dangerous. Adding a courier would make things easier and provide protection, but Edda was stubborn and refused a third member. She argued that carrying their own gear was fine until a fight, dismissing the need for extra help. When Dean asked what she'd do if they needed to flee, Edda sharply insisted she never turns her back on an enemy. Dean quickly pointed out that her confidence and stubbornness could be deadly in the dungeon's depths. After some debate, they agreed to form a duo instead of a trio. They set out for Moose Den, which Dean described as a good place to earn money for those at level 20 or above. However, Moose Den required enough people to handle the fights. During a mob stampede, no one dared approach the den. Dean explained that they could only safely explore up to the second floor, as going deeper would require an environmentalist to clear the miasma. He pulled out a map to plan their route, but Edda showed no interest in it. Edda pointed out that Dean had an auto-sensor, so his map planning was just for show. She warned that over-relying on the sensor could dull their senses if they weren't careful, leading to mistakes. In the worst case, they might encounter an unexpected enemy. Together, Dean and Edda found a fresh monster track to follow. Dean verifies that the creature is a moose but advises returning due to their limited knowledge of the path ahead. However, Edda's determination resurfaces, and she insists on not letting another group claim their prize after their efforts. Despite their reckless and overly cautious dynamic, the pair presses forward, tracking the monster until they finally confront it. The moose is a level 22 typical specimen, and they dive into the fight without hesitation. Edda, eager to prove herself, drops their gear, draws her weapon, and expertly decapitates the creature. She had previously claimed they didn't need extra help, and this seems to prove it. Meanwhile, Dean spots a flying dragon attempting to steal their unattended baggage. Dean alerts Edda to the dragon, but before they can act, the same moose they defeated reappears, now joined by a group of ferocious monsters ready to attack. Outnumbered at least 5-1 and low on supplies, Edda has no choice but to grab Dean and flee to safety. Their enemies have now seen their vulnerability. Once they put some distance between themselves and the monsters, Edda sets Dean down. She asks about the contents of the lost baggage, and Dean admits it contains several lamps and a canteen. He takes responsibility for the loss, apologizing for not watching the gear closely. Edda, though, knows she also contributed to their setback. Edda acknowledges that having someone to guard their belongings might have changed the outcome. Seeing her disappointment, Dean reassures her that her quick actions ensured his escape. He suggests their two-person team might be the right fit after all. Instead of dwelling on blame, he proposes they head home and return another day. Despite appreciating Dean's encouragement, Edda notices he's eating from her canteen. She points it out, and Dean, apologizing, offers it back, noting she's likely more exhausted and needs it. But Edda's objection wasn't about the canteen itself. She seems to miss the concept of teamwork. On their carriage ride home, Dean and Edda are relieved to avoid spending the night in the dungeon. Edda playfully teases Dean that a night with him would have been awful. She brings up the idea of expanding their team to 3 members, now showing enthusiasm for the concept. Edda firmly states she won't accept guild members as their new teammate, distrusting those whose backgrounds she doesn't know. Dean admits he has no suitable contacts for the role, but Edda recalls someone. She mentions a blacksmith girl she met when she last took Dean home. Edda shares that she had a brief talk with the girl that day. Dean, slightly anxious, asks what they discussed. Edda explains she simply handed Dean over to Marnie, assuring her his life wasn't in danger. Marnie, overjoyed at Dean's safety, hugged Edda in gratitude for bringing him back. Hearing this, Dean wonders why he was so worried, as their talk was hardly significant. As long as it avoided sensitive topics about him, he's fine with it. He's also pleased Edda mentioned Marnie first, admitting he'd always planned to invite her but wanted to see how things played out. Dean's relieved Edda has no negative views about Marnie. He shares that he has a request for Edda. Later, at home, Dean and Edda discuss their decision with Marnie. She's surprised by their offer, worried she might hinder or slow them down. Dean explains that they chose her because they need someone trustworthy. Marnie agrees but notes that just keeping watch feels too basic and risky. She suggests that having a weapon would help ease their load during battles. Dean, expecting this, pulls out a sock holding Beelzebub and Ogre's magic bone, rare and costly items. Marnie questions how he got them, and Dean says his good rapport with his new teammates earned them as thanks for crafting a unique weapon, which is waiting by the door. Marnie acknowledges Dean's desire to impress Marnie, but reminds him to repay the 250 times he borrowed from her, a past request. She's stunned he'd borrow so much from a teammate. She warns that borrowing like this could spark team conflicts and questions why he didn't ask her instead. From this, she guesses his new teammate often lends money. Examining Dean's materials again, Marnie sees potential for a powerful creation. Dean mentions he learns a lot just by being around her. The next day, Marnie unveils her new creation for Dean, God of the Devil's Warhammer, a C-ranked magic hammer with divine protection. She encourages Dean to inspect it via email. Though hesitant, Dean is pleased once he tests it. Marnie's hammer is unique, suited for both combat and mining. She designed it expecting to find valuable minerals on the 2nd floor and below. She also plans to reforge Dean's sword once they gather enough minerals. Dean says it depends on his luck, and the conversation pauses there. Now outside, Marnie and Dean study maps, focusing on mining rather than hunting. Dean proposes visiting Rosenberg's underground ruins, where the 3rd floor holds cobalt, a mineral guarded by fierce kobolds. Marnie wonders if he can handle these creatures. The Sword of Gluttony speaks, insisting its power shouldn't be doubted. Even on the 100th floor, they arrive at the guild, which seems delayed today. After closer inspection, they spot Edda waiting in a corner, oddly hidden as usual. But their attention shifts as the military storms into the guild, led by the brusque Marty, who seems annoyed by her surroundings. She demands magic gear from the receptionist, keeping details vague to limit others' knowledge. Pryor presents a document from Marty, a Magnus officer, stating the army will now control their gear. The receptionist, lacking orders from the guild master, refuses to comply. Priya brutally crushes the receptionist's fingers in one strike, a shocking act for onlookers. The guild master emerges, quickly apologizing for the staff's conduct. To smooth things over, she retrieves Black Radiance, a cursed gemstone, as Priya requested. Priya hands it to her subordinates to verify its authenticity, and the test confirms it's genuine. They understand that evil cannot be used to examine the stone's properties, as only its name is visible. Yami achieve their goal and depart swiftly. Meanwhile, Marnie notices Dean's struggle to restrain himself, surprised that he didn't confront the savage officials. Dean remains preoccupied, questioning the true nature of the gemstone. Just then, an odd-looking stranger approaches to greet them, assuring them he means no harm and only wishes to share information. Marnie apologizes for her wariness, noting his unfamiliar face, which he attributes to his frequent travels, visiting the town sporadically for business. He inquires about their knowledge of the trap linked to a hedgehog. Dean's paper contains details about the gemstone, which he reads aloud. The demon's case file mentions a villager finding a man near underground ruins, who survived but was driven mad. A military report identifies the man as an adventurer, with villagers noting that 5 people, including him, entered the demon labyrinth that day. That's all the paper reveals, so the stranger continues. The man's party members were around level 30, giving him confidence. The stranger explains that the rescued man returned with a gemstone called the Trappers of Hatred, which an insane person couldn't have concealed. It was handled at the guild as lost property. The stranger knows little about the gemstone beyond its name and level 35 status. He compares it to an 8-ring magic gear, valued at 1,000,000 times, noting the irony that the group aimed to become adventurers, but 4 died, and the survivor lost his sanity. The stranger chuckles, which Dean finds odd, responding strangely by hinting at abandoning the dangerous exploration. The stranger downplays the labyrinth's dangers, but suggests Dean fears him more, causing Dean to step back in fear. Marnie steps in, warning the stranger to keep his distance. The stranger retreats, explaining he only wanted to greet the creator and owner of his magic sword. Questions arise about his identity and knowledge of them. He warns them to guard their possessions in the labyrinth, whether magic, instincts, or allies, before leaving. Dean and Marnie ponder how he knew so much, especially that one of them crafted the sword and who did it. Marnie guesses he deduced her blacksmith roll from her mallet, but many questions linger. With the stranger gone, they relax slightly. Dean notices Idea walking away, and her response suggests she was distracted during the encounter. Wondering if this relates to the military, Marnie innocently approaches Idea, expressing excitement about working together. Idea, seeming overwhelmed, tells Marnie to stick to her duties and leave frontline fighting to her and Dean. Dean quickly tries to calm things down after a rude remark, reassuring Marnie that the comment was meant kindly, though the speaker stands by her words. She makes it clear she's not here to baby Marnie. At the same time, a separate meeting is happening for a very different reason. Bishop Earnshaw greets the massed crowd and shares exciting news. The long-lost gemstone trapezoid region has finally been discovered, a breakthrough that will push their plans forward. But frustration hits when Bishop Earnshaw learns the military bishop of Reno has seized the magic gear, leaving them stuck without clear direction. For now they're vulnerable, like sitting ducks or helpless lambs. Just then, a young girl guiding the bishop whispers something that sparks excitement. The bishop declares her vision promises they'll trouble the sinners who defiled their sanctuary, with the trap set and the Grey Cult, followers of Dr. Boros, soon to claim the Black Radiance. The crowd erupts in joy, hanging on every word from their guide. Bishop Reno urges them to offer gifts to the sanctuary, calling for a volunteer to present the offering. Someone steps forward without hesitation, chosen instantly for the weapon they carry. It's obvious what kind of offering they mean. The mask hides the volunteer's identity, but their target or targets is clear. 3 sinners, 3 criminals to sacrifice to Dr. Boros. Their sleeping lord in Lulla, danger looms for Dean. In the labyrinth, Marnie and Dean face a white. The creature swings its club, but Dean instinctively blocks it from behind, as if he can see everything. The white charges again, and Dean, using Fyodor's skill and courage, catches the club bare-handed. The blow still hurts, making Dean wince, but he musters the strength to throw the white back. Checking his arm, he sees his hand and palm are unharmed, though the force reached his elbow. To lessen future impacts, he knows he must think more like Fyodor. The white, thrown to the ground, starts crawling back toward him. Marnie crushes the white with her hammer. Dean praises her skill, and she proudly says she's 14 now and can handle white alone. She asks Dean if she can take on the next one by herself, and he smiles, telling her to go ahead. They rest briefly before extracting bones from the white. Dean recalls his first adventure with Marnie in these same Romanburg ruins. Kobolds, monsters on the third floor, are their next target, specifically the precious kobold. This makes Dean ask Marnie why kobolds are called treasures. She explains they form from the fossilized body fluids of kobolds. Over time, the soil soaks up the sweat and saliva of hibernating kobolds, turning into cobalt, a mineral with powerful magic. This makes kobolds a magnet for mages and adventurers, though kobolds use it to mark territory and attract mates. Their talk is suddenly cut off by Edda, who they'd completely forgotten was with them. She instructs them to stop talking and remain alert. Marnie says sorry for getting distracted, and Dean mentally acknowledges the reminder. As they venture further into the dungeon, Marnie quietly tells Dean that it truly seems to dislike her. Dean laughs softly, thinking it does appear that way, but keeps this to himself. Instead, he shares that inviting her was his idea, perhaps by a lake. Dean adds that he even agreed to loan money for a magic hammer. Just as he starts to make an excuse for its behavior, Addison hurls a stone at him and shouts, claiming she's not nervous around them. Dean hurriedly leaves to escape the uncomfortable moment. Later, the three adventurers regroup and proceed through the ruins using their map. They reach a spot where light glows from a wall's entrance. As they near it, a kobold suddenly attacks them. Dean and Edda narrowly avoid the strike. Dean quickly stands up. He uses Emu to evaluate the kobold, finding it's level 32 with traits like mineral detection, magic, blood, and night vision, and abilities like laceration and Tempest Roar. Tempest Roar lets the kobold unleash a powerful windstorm with its roar. Edda tries a sneak attack from behind, but the kobold senses her and blocks her sword with its axe. Dean notes that this kobold's Tempest Roar is unusual, as typical kobolds only have a basic roar. He suddenly suspects it might be a unique variant, but before he can alert Edda, the kobold uses Tempest Roar, slamming Edda against a wall. Edda tries to resist and charge back, but the kobold grabs her with its paws, effortlessly squeezing her. Dean casts a trick dove at the kobold, and the explosion forces it to drop Edda to the ground. The kobold howls in pain, and Dean takes the chance to strike with his gluttony sword. He shouts to the others that now's the time to attack. Together, they overpower the kobold, defeating it. Dean's level rises from 23 to 24, and Edda's increases from 26 to 27. While harvesting the kobold's fight bone, Dean mutters that as he grows stronger, his enemies do too. He asks Marnie about her kobold mining progress, and she yells back that it'll take a bit and invites him to see. After finishing carving, Dean notices Marnie's usual cheerfulness. He asks Edda if she'd help harvest the bones, but she refuses. Later, Edda asks if Dean can use magic or abilities, but he stays quiet, hesitant to respond. She reassures him that it's okay if he can't share. Dean decides not to hide it anymore and admits his sword has a devil's ego, letting it steal enemies' abilities. He also confesses he's uneasy with new groups, so he plans to keep traveling with Edda. She laughs, teasing him for talking to himself too much. At the expedition's end, they calculate their gathered items' value at about 250,000 times. Leaving the ruins, Dean uses his Odo sense to avoid monsters. Suddenly, he feels an odd discomfort. He remembers Odo isn't just in creatures with souls, but also in trace amounts in minerals and plants, causing faint noise. Edda's heightened senses are overwhelmed by a faint noise that's usually imperceptible. He encounters two corpses propped against a wall, one missing its heart, which is still warm, and another figure slumped in their blood. Inspecting the bodies, Edda notes the gruesome details, while Dean, puzzled, questions why he didn't detect any danger beforehand. Marnie's eyes catch a peculiar symbol etched on the wall, prompting her to ask her companions if they recognize it. The group tenses as a man's body suddenly rolls into the dark alley at their feet. Soon they hear footsteps approaching, and by the light of their raised lamps, they see a cloaked figure wearing a mask and holding a double-edged weapon. The masked figure ominously declares the three adventurers ideal for sacrifice, then removes the mask to reveal a girl named Gosar from the Great Order. Grinning wickedly, she coldly states this as their end. Dean, briefly confused about the Great Order, pushes the thought aside to focus on why he couldn't sense Gosar's presence. Dean suspects Gosar is using magic to suppress his abilities. Smirking, Gosar admits to being found out, saying there's no need for tricks now. With a snap of her fingers, Dean feels a surge of malicious Odo energy from her. Spinning her scythe, Gosar taunts them, claiming they'll be perfect offerings for her master, Ouroboros. Gosar adds that they shouldn't lament their fate as they'll be consumed joyfully. She unleashes a spinning shockwave from her scythe, nearly cutting Marnie in half, but Dean shoves her out of harm's way just in time. He warns the team that her attacks are lethal and identifies Gosar as a mid-range fighter. Before Dean can suggest taking cover, Gosar charges, aiming to strike from behind. Edda intervenes, blocking the attack with her sword. Gosar praises Edda's skill, but notes her own prowess. In a flash, Gosar tries to maneuver behind Edda, who spins just in time to parry the next blow. The duel escalates as Edda and Gosar's swords clash at blinding speed. Gosar, grinning wildly, remarks that it's impressive Edda can match a servant of the Great Order. Dean, watching in frustration, realizes he can't track Gosar's movements and would only hinder Edda if he joined in, acknowledging they're on a different level. Fearing Edda might lose if the fight continues, Dean decides to unleash Beelzebub. The creature charges, but Gosar, anticipating it, uses strange magic to make Beelzebub disappear instantly. With a wicked smile, she calls their situation unfortunate. Dean, stunned, wonders how Beelzebub was defeated so effortlessly. Dean theorizes Gosar's magic-canceling skill disrupted Beelzebub's temporary tulpa form, making it vulnerable. He realizes his own skills would likely be nullified too, rendering them useless. Choosing to wait for an opportunity, Dean holds back from acting rashly. Meanwhile, Gosar questions why Edda doesn't see that Dean could bring her salvation, scoffing at the idea. Edda retorts, asking if salvation is possible after death. Gosar replies that Edda is already marching toward death, fueled by rage and hatred. Gosar kicks Edda and unleashes a shockwave from her sword, but Edda narrowly dodges it. Edda gestures for Dean to strike, and he confidently assures her he's in control and will manage the situation. Gosar then uses her ability, directing it at Morty, and launches an attack toward Dean. Dean, however, calls upon Beelzebub again, who blocks the assault. Beelzebub mutters in frustration about being used as a shield and threatens Dean with consequences later. Dean soothes Beelzebub by promising she can eat her fill afterward. At the same time, Gosar continues her attack on Edda. Edda tries to dodge with her incredible speed, which not only keeps up with Gosar but also outmaneuvers her, landing a slash with her blade. Gosar cautions Edda that the flash step technique is too complex for a human without years of training, especially when used to jump into the air, creating a vulnerable gap, particularly against others skilled in the same method. This puts humans at a significant disadvantage, but Edda ignores Gosar's warning, activates her haste ability, and tells Gosar not to underestimate a woman who combines flash step with support magic. As Edda charges forward, chains suddenly pull her back, anchoring her in place. Despite her efforts to break free, the chains materialize from nowhere, binding her arms and legs tightly. Gosar names this technique the crucifix. Dean tries to step in, but is too weak to even stand, his Odo depleted. He pleads with Gosar to stop, but she disregards him and stabs Edda with her blade. In desperation, Dean charges at Gosar and is kicked in the mouth. He uses Harden to lessen the impact, but he still takes some damage himself. Gosar gloats over her triumph, bragging that she typically defeats her enemies with this technique. She then speaks to Marnie, who is hiding, saying she'll spare her for now, prompting sobs. Marnie realizes Gosar is trying to draw her out, but knows she's helpless. Dean, frantic, yells Marnie's name, swearing he won't let Gosar hurt her or anyone else further. Dean begs Marnie to hold on for him. Gosar mocks Dean, ridiculing his belief that he can escape his situation. As she prepares to step him, Dean releases a liquid that dissolves the chains, freeing himself. He immediately slashes Gosar with his sword and traps her by using her own crucifix technique against her. Confused, Gosar struggles to comprehend how she's now caught in her own spell. Gosar tries to activate the magic council again, but Dean, in anguish, drives his sword into her stomach. Realizing her death is imminent despite possessing a magical item that interacts with the dream world, Gosar hears Dean say she's now feeling just a fraction of the pain she's inflicted. As she dies, Gosar smiles faintly, whispering that the feeling is strangely enjoyable. Dean harshly labels her a psychopath. The return from the labyrinth is unsettlingly silent, with no one speaking during the journey home. Days later, Dean carries Gosar's body and belongings to report the incident to the guild. The experience feels like a grim memory from childhood when monsters attacked his village and devoured his mother. He wakes abruptly, sweating and breathing heavily. While making breakfast later, Dean peels potatoes and suddenly sees blood on his hands, a vivid memory from the labyrinth. The trauma of killing a human for the first time lingers, haunting him at the dinner table. Sitting quietly with Beelzebub, Dean barely eats. Beelzebub grumbles about eating potatoes again, commenting that they're even more seasoned than usual. She questions if he's even attempting to cook correctly, playfully holding a piece of food near his face and urging him to taste it. But she pauses when she sees his gloomy look. Without a second thought, she grabs his plate and eats everything on it. Dean, shocked, shouts at her, but she coolly responds that if he wanted to eat, he should stop moping and just do it. She then grins, noting it's the first time he's spoken since they got back from the labyrinth. Dean admits he thought he could separate killing monsters from killing people, and though he's taken lives before, he now feels repulsed by himself. Beelzebub assures him he'll grow accustomed to it. He asks if taking a life is supposed to feel good, and she replies that his idealistic mindset is pointless since progress requires tough choices, and choosing one thing means giving up another. Drawing from her eternal life, she asks if one death is enough to shake his conviction. Sensing Dean's lack of response, she sighs, saying she doesn't care as long as she gets tasty food. Dean starts to think Beelzebub might be right but questions if he could kill again to save others. His thoughts are cut short by a sudden knock at the door. Dina, surprised to see Marnie, invites her in and asks what's wrong, noting Marnie rarely visits. Marnie laughs, saying she drops by sometimes. Beelzebub teases that Marnie's after her potato soup, but it's gone since she ate it all. Beelzebub softens her stance. Seeing Marnie brought bread and snacks in a basket, Beelzebub eagerly starts eating. Marnie sits with Dean, asking if his injuries are healing well. He assures her he's not badly hurt. Marnie shares that her own injuries are improving, and Ella can now walk around town independently. Dean, surprised, wonders if the magic device's healing powers helped, hoping Ella's recovery is genuine. Beelzebub interrupts, asking Dean about lunch and dinner plans, despite just finishing breakfast. Dean groans inwardly but gets an idea, and invites Marnie to go shopping with him. Marnie happily agrees, excited to join him in the city. A shadow appears, and a cloaked man with an angry expression emerges. Meanwhile, Dean and Marnie stroll through the lively streets, browsing for items. They remark on the city's vibrant atmosphere, with Marnie noting the market's morning bustle and how much she enjoys its energy. At the butcher shop, they see a single beef serving costs 6,000 tummies. Dean buys 36,000 worth to satisfy Beelzebub's appetite. Marnie jokingly calls it a good deal, but warns against spending so much on beef. Dean insists it's okay to splurge occasionally. He orders 6 portions of gourmet roast from the butcher, who eyes Dean and Marnie skeptically, assuming they can't afford it. The butcher rudely calls in window shoppers and tells them not to waste his time. Before he finishes, Dean places 36,000 heavies on the counter. The butcher's demeanor shifts instantly, and he prepares the meat quickly, respectfully saying he hopes they'll return for more business. Dean strides out of the shop, brimming with confidence, but his mood shifts when Marnie questions if he's settled the debt he owes her. His pride crumbles as he recalls his obligations and stammers about a fair repayment plan. Marnie expresses regret, acknowledging her partial role in the debt since he took it on for her sake. As they walk, they unexpectedly run into Gilbert, someone they never expected to see again. Gilbert accuses Dean of misusing money from a gold mine he claims Dean stole to fund lavish shopping trips with a gyro. Annoyed, Marnie challenges Gilbert's attitude, reminding him that Dean saved his life and calling his theft accusation shameful. Dean tries to quiet Marnie as Gilbert, now frantic, blames Dean for all his misfortunes that day, claiming his magic item was stolen by a courier handed to the guild and then seized by the army, all because of Dean's alleged theft. Fed up with Gilbert's complaints, Dean says goodbye and starts to leave, but Gilbert pursues him, grabbing Dean's sword as repayment for ruining his life. He quickly realizes he's too weak to wrest the sword from Dean, who's grown much stronger. Their confrontation is cut short by a man shouting at someone to get off his roof. Dean notices the man's hood marks him as a member of the Great Order. The man, introducing himself as Brad, a priest of the Great Order, declares that someone among them killed their disciple Gosar, triggering a citywide massacre. Brad activates his Shadow Gate skill, disappearing into his shadow, which darts from roof to ground before he reappears. He swiftly kills 2 bystanders with his sword, prompting Gilbert and many others to flee in panic. Marnie urges Dean to run, but he's paralyzed by trauma, spiraling into a panic attack. Out of nowhere, a mysterious boy appears, intercepting Brad's attack.